Spoiler alert, tennis fans. Carlos Alcaraz won Wimbledon, beating Novak Djokovic in 4 sets. Now, my firm maintains an office in the north of Spain, so we're very happy about that, but you are business people and investors. What do you care about Carlos? Why am I talking to you about this? Well, you know, the kid wants money. We're going to talk about that. So Carlos just won $3 million, give or take, 2.3 million pounds, and he won it in a foreign country. So, international tax implications. Now, what are the key laws? What are the penalties? And what can you do to set up your business affairs in a way to minimize international taxation, or, as we say in the business, be more tax efficient? First of all, my lawyerly disclaimer, I love tennis. My family and I had a great time watching the match. So maybe I just jumped on the excuse to talk about it. But obviously, international taxation is a hairy topic, and I'll tell you why. Well, every country has its own laws. Some countries' laws are more onerous than others, and some countries are more aggressive in enforcing those laws than others. And then just to keep things fun, you know, the treaties that are between countries and the provisions of those treaties are different. It's not like there's one cohesive body of international law that we can look at. Not at all. So all I can really do here is touch on some of the main topics that apply in most situations, try to give you some helpful tips. Well, let me start with this. When you think of taxes, you probably think of an accountant, right? Makes sense. But what's a tax attorney? You know, is there overlap there? And if I have an accountant that I like, why would I need an attorney? Yeah, good question. Now, I love you accountants out there. I regularly collaborate with accountants, and I know that you're very smart and capable people. In fact, I would say the best way to deal with these tricky international tax issues, and they're always tricky, is this. You have the client engage the law firm. The law firm then hires the accountant. So that way we have the accountant working under the umbrella of the law firm. Now, why do it like this? If you're the client, why are you paying 2 professionals instead of just 1? So accountants don't get attorney-client privilege. And that means that all your communications with the accountant could come out in a dispute with the IRS or other tax authority. And maybe that won't matter, or maybe it will. By contrast, if the law firm hires the accountant, well then the attorney-client privilege extends. They're covered. Now, all your communications are totally confidential. There might be some exceptions for criminal activity, but we'll stay out of the minutia. Now, this privilege is not only important for the client, but the accountants also appreciate it. Because after all, you know, if you do find yourself in a dispute with the IRS, well, the accountant is in the hot seat right along with you, at least to a certain extent. So to be able to say to the IRS, hey, you can't ask that question, well, that's a beautiful thing. Accountants, and I don't mean to speak for you, but I'm friends with many of you, so I think you would probably agree that you would like to think of yourselves as bean counters. And I don't mean that in an insultory way, so let me explain. Unlike attorneys, accountants can't give tax advice. Now, certainly they have to interpret tax laws, so there's definitely some gray area there. But when faced with a question from a client of what's legal and what isn't, I think things can get very uncomfortable very fast for an accountant. And I think they're likely to give a very conservative answer, and I don't blame them for that. Because at the end of the day, if there is a dispute with the IRS or other tax authority, I think the accountant wants to be able to say, look, I just crunched the numbers that I was given, I didn't give any advice, didn't tell the client what to do, the client made his or her own decisions, I just put it all into the software, and you know, that's the extent of my role. I think that's right. Look, all this is to say that if you're dealing with a sticky issue, you're going to need both an accountant and an attorney. Because look, I don't do the things that they do. You know, I don't know how to work their software. I don't know these form numbers off the top of my head. And I don't know these cool little filing deadline tricks that you guys do. Good job. So in the end, the services of an accountant and an attorney don't really overlap. It's not like the client has to pay double just because there are 2 different professionals involved. But I promised you guys some talk about tax efficiency, so let's dive into that just a little bit. For one thing, have you noticed that a lot of these tennis players, you know that they're French or Spanish or American or whatever, but they show their residence as Monaco? Well, that's something you can do. You can find one of these tax-friendly countries like in the Caribbean, where they basically say, whatever money you make outside of our country, just pay that government your taxes and we want nothing to do with it. So, that's one thing you can do. Of course, moving to a tax-friendly jurisdiction, well, that's a pretty big move. And also be aware of worldwide taxation. So what is worldwide taxation? Okay, well, most of the more developed countries, like Europe, certainly the United States, places where people really want to be, they have the concept of worldwide taxation, which means that not only do you need to pay the taxes for whatever is made in that country, but if you're a citizen of one of these countries, then whatever you make outside of the country, well, you're gonna have to at least report it. And if you've paid less tax to the foreign country than what would be due here in the United States, you're gonna have to pay the difference. So it's not double taxation exactly, but it's lots of disclosure, and if there's any shortfall, you're gonna have to pay the difference to the US, or you end up not saving any money. But let's imagine for a moment you don't feel like upending your whole world and moving to a foreign country. So what can you do short of that? Well, I'm going to give this only the most superficial treatment, because one, it's terribly complex and depends upon your specific circumstances. And two, if you go to my website here, you're going to find lots of articles written on these topics, and in particular trusts. So that's one thing I will touch on here. The concept is this: you want to remove income from your estate. What is your estate? Well, that's you. That's what the IRS is taxing, your estate. So how do you remove certain income from your estate? Well, one way you can do that is through a trust. Now, let me interject here that in my experience, you generally look at some sort of a trade-off. In the case of a trust, it has to be set up in a specific way. It has to be irrevocable. You can't have any control over the trust. And so in the case of trust, the trade-off that you're looking at is convenience. So for example, you can't be your own trustee. You can't be your own beneficiary. Those kinds of trusts work fantastic for estate planning, but they don't work for tax purposes. Another consideration is the initial setup cost, right? Depending upon how elaborate your plan is. But, what do the cost savings over time look like versus the initial cost of putting together the plan? So that, my friends, is why you care about Carlos Alcaraz winning the Gentlemen's Championship at Wimbledon this past weekend. Thanks so much for tuning in. Stand by for more soon.